Okay. Okay, so my name is Khan and I'm one of the current disabilities officers at the University of Sydney SRC. And I'm also an international student. I'd like to first pay acknowledgement and respect to that the land that we are standing on is unceded and stolen Gadigal land. This housing and cost of living crisis affect not only domestic students and my peers, but also acutely on not only myself, but also the international students, the millions of international students in the country right now. Amidst this crisis, many of us have no options but to rent, and especially to those who are new students, but to rent expensive beds provided by for-profit providers like Scape, Unilodge, and WeHer, and many others. Many of these rooms cost regularly north of $500. And there is one in near Darling Square that costs $700 at minimum. And that's more than the elitist residential colleges at UCIT alone. They thrive on making sure that we pay and milk each and every cent out of us. The international education sector loves to peddle and then repeat the claim that the international student education sector brings $40 billion to the country a year. The country's 5th or 4th largest export, depending on the year you're talking about. But this 40 billion odd figure is made out of hard-earned money that our families invest in, and a sector setting us up for exorbitant rent and overcharging us at each available opportunity. We are not walking dollar signs, even if governments actually love doing so. They sometimes look at us in a very condescending way. I remember last year during an international student conference when a very famous, actually, politician in Sydney, I won't name who, but they said something along the lines of, to a room full of international students, it was actually an international student welcome orientation event, where they said something along this line. They were complimenting our English skills. They were saying, "Oh, I'm surprised that the cohort. I'm an international student ambassador. I'm surprised that your English is so good." It was casual, another moment of casual racism, seeing us as walking dollar signs, and I urge that government, I wish that the state government, the federal government, and everyone in the entire sector to just stop seeing us as walking dollar signs, because it is not just on the way they see international students, it's the way they see everyone. They see everyone as having to produce that extra profit in order to gain something, in order to be deserving of something. I call that bullshit, to be very honest. I call that bullshit, to be honest. None of us deserve to be treated that way. And I would like to also touch on one topic that others who can have spoken on, which is gentrification, especially in Redfern and Indigenous land. Expensive private purpose-built student accommodation is booming and exploding like never before, especially in Redfern. Multiple projects, 600 rooms, each of them costing something again, like $500 north, making and disadvantaging at the detriment of not only us, international students, but also to residents around there, because $500 is a lot of money, and it is setting up for stress and further cost of living stress. And I'd like to touch on one more thing, which is that it's no coincidence that universities in this city are so elitist. No university in this city, except for one, as I'm aware of, Western Sydney University, have public school intakes above 20%. It's no coincidence. With costs and rents this high, students who come from rural, regional, and anywhere outside of New South Wales, if you don't already live in Sydney, you're priced out of this city. You're priced out of getting a quality education at our major universities here. UCIT, where I study, is among the third or the fourth worst in terms of public school intake. UNDA, UNSW, you name it. It's basically, with the cost of living and rental crisis, it is pushing low SAS students and regional students and rural students out of our universities. Minister Jason Clare loves to talk about how to get and wanting to get more low SAS students and disabled students into our best universities. Well, how do you do that? When there is an acute cost of living crisis, if you have piecemeal packages for students, that will not be enough. That will never be enough, because that elitism is baked right into the way that we live and have struggled every single day. And finally, I want to touch on one thing that is the deeply flawed, to say least, real estate development industry. The construction and real estate development industry is might enforce a deep ethical disaster of its own. In New South Wales, I like to touch on cladding just as a small example. I actually used to live in London 6 years ago, and I remember crying on the night that Grenfell Tower happened because a friend of mine lost someone in that fire. Yet in New South Wales in 2022, the latest figures that were available, just 40% of our buildings, just 40% out of 1,200 buildings under local council jurisdiction identified as either at-risk because of dodgy cladding, have so far been fixed or been identified as low risk. That is appallingly low. There are residents in this city living in often high density buildings that have flammable cladding. But the cladding, I raised the cladding issue just as one example because there are lots more. Lack of maintenance, lack of care, unless you're wealthy. It is deep. It is like an iceberg. There are so much deeper in that iceberg, and I like to say that even if I guess echo what Jenny Leong said before about things seemingly look impossible, but actions and activism and actions like this, I think, are so deeply valuable and meaningful, because we're pushing politicians and governments who thrive literally on turning a blind eye away and inactions, just like on cladding, just like on public housing policy. But as long as we fight on and keep pushing and shouting, we will get something back. We will get there. And I like to say that because like 6 years ago when I was in London, in Grenfell, years before that, residents had a blog that no mainstream media ever picked on, warning about the danger signs. That's just one example. And actions like this, community voices like this, is so important, because you guys are basically the knowledge and institutional knowledge about housing, your own experiences. So I like to end on that, and I like to call on, again, echo calls for freezing rents and affordable rooms and beds for not only students but for everyone in the city. And finally,